quick explanation time. These are all tips that you generally won't find in any tutorial on how to do fluid simulations in Blender. Most of them are things that I had to sift through forums for a couple hours just to find information on. So if you're just looking for some quick information on certain things, here are the tips I'm going to be going through, and here are the timestamps of where they are in the video. 3, 2, 1, let's do this. The first tip I have for you guys is to always render in an image sequence, and there's two main reasons for this. The first and probably most important reason is crashes. In case Blender crashes while you're trying to render in an MP4 or any other movie file format, tough luck, because that file format is going to be corrupted because it doesn't render each frame separately. Unless it finishes the render, it's going to get corrupted. If you're rendering an image sequence, you can just go back to whatever the last frame was that was actually properly rendered and continue from there. You don't lose any data if your computer crashes or if Windows decides it needs to do an update right now. No ifs, ands, or buts. The second reason, and the reason that I had to do it, is because I was having a problem where the video file would get more and more grainy as it went on. I'm not really sure why it did that. It started off fine, but ended up getting more and more grainy, and the best explanation I could come up with is that Blender decided it wanted to compress each frame based on the compressions of the last frame. Meaning the starting frame is like a JPEG, and the last frame is like a JPEG to the power of 120. It basically ends up like a jumble of pixels, and you don't want that. You want each frame to look perfect, which is why rendering an image sequence is a good idea. So how you're going to want to do this is you're going to want to make sure your resolution is set. I'm doing 1920 by 1080. And you're just going to want to go to output, change the file format to PNG. You're going to want to make sure that you have a folder set for the image sequence to go to. I usually just make sequence render folders and label them based on what render I'm trying to do. Then all you have to do is click animation, and it'll start rendering into that folder every frame separately. As you can see right here, once it's done, it will have every frame of the entire video rendered. In order to convert the image sequence to an actual video, you're going to want to go into any video editing software. I recommend Sony Vegas Pro because it makes this part a lot easier. I know you can do this in Blender, but the Blender video editor really sucks. I would not recommend using it. To do this in Pro, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go up to the top left, go under Options, all the way down to Preferences, go into Editing, and under the option of New Still Image Length, you're going to want to set it to 0.033. This will make it so that each frame or each image will be its own frame. Alright, so what you're going to want to do is go into Import Media like normal. You just go ahead and drag all the images that you want to import to be frames. You go ahead and click Open to transfer them to Sony Vegas. Then you can just drag them into the timeline. And as you can see, it'll put them all in order automatically. So if you go ahead and play, you can see it'll play your video in time to be however long you rendered it. Alright, the next tip I have for you guys is how to move the camera throughout your scene. Now this isn't necessarily just good for fluid renders, it's good for anything on Blender, so I think it's a good one to include. So how you're going to want to do this is you're going to want to first select your camera, hit numpad 0 in order to zoom back to the camera's view. You're going to want to then hit Shift and F in order to enter fly mode. Now you can move around the camera to wherever you want. Wherever you want it to start moving from. I'm just going to position it right here. Left click to set it. You're going to want to move your timeline to wherever you want your camera to start moving. Because as you can see right now, the camera's not moving. I'm going to have it start moving at the first frame. Then what we're going to do is we're going to hit I. We're going to need to go to lock rotation. So that's going to set the camera's rotation to lock on frame 1. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the frame that you want the camera to stop moving. I'm going to stop it at frame 120. Enter fly mode again, Shift F. You can change it, position it to wherever you want it to stop moving. Left click to set it. I, lock rotation. And now what you should see is that the camera moves throughout the scene. Easy as pie. Alright, the third tip I have for you guys is one that may seem a little bit insignificant, but is actually very, very important to remember. So what you're going to want to make sure is when you're setting your physics for your fluid, go to fluid particles, make sure you do not generate too many of these. If you do, you're going to have a bad time. I usually keep it below the 100th place. I set this one at 5,000ths, and that is, perfectly fine for most fluid simulations that you're going to have to do. If you do, it's really easy to go too many on these, so I just recommend keeping it really low, and you shouldn't have any problems. Otherwise, your computer might just be creating a rainstorm, and that will take a very long time to render, so just don't. Alright, the fourth tip I have is another one that is very important to remember. Now, something you may notice is that sometimes you'll try to launch your Blender fluid simulation, and you'll get this. Basically, you don't see the simulation at all. You just see the boundary, and you see the source, but you don't see any actual fluid. And the main reason that this is going to happen is if your fluid cache is not in the same folder as the actual save for the simulation. Now, basically, if you did move your simulation save to another folder, that's probably going to be the explanation for why. In that case, you could just move it back to the same folder, and you'll be able to run it perfectly fine. If you do accidentally delete your fluid cache, you should be able to just bake a new one and not have any problems other than that, only losing about 20 minutes of work, so it's not that bad.